we can get caught in this extremely disassociated state from like what we truly feel. And that's something I've been exploring in the game too, with the farther you get from how you truly feel internally is just going to make you extremely tired because you're building all these structures within structures. Hey, Demon Dev here. I thought I would throw down a video in a new place. Just moved to this apartment, which has the coolest office space I've ever had. Otherwise, it's a bit smaller, but I'm liking the switch up. Anyways, one thing that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I'm sure this is something that already exists as another term, but I like coming up with my own words to attach to things so I can try to create a I guess thoughts from whatever I'm feeling and less so lean upon other stuff. So the idea that I'm kind of getting into today is meta emotionality. So what I mean by meta emotionality is just like meta, thinking about the thing, sort of like a level of of abstraction. And sort of what that comes down to is it's a common aspect of being a guy, or just in a lot of dynamics, needing to control their own emotions, stay cool under pressure, react logically, or make quick thinking decisions fast when it counts. And this can be both whatever people like talking about, like actual danger, like there's violence at hand, or way more nuanced, like in social situations where someone said something mean or could be construed as mean, or maybe it's in this sort of gray area where you can't tell exactly whether it was an insult or maybe even a compliment. If you bring it up, maybe they'll be like, oh, that was supposed to be a nice thing. And then, you're the jerk for interpreting it negatively. So all those sorts of complicated things. And I think there is a lot of focus on like direct emotionality, like, oh, I'm feeling, hurt or sad or happy or, excited or, stressed, anxious. But I think something has always been more, I guess, tricky to parse is, when other people are having strong emotions and how to react to them. Now, some are a little bit simpler. If someone's being angry, it's, they're yelling at you or, making aggressive, mean, hostile faces. We get that, that's a simpler emotion. It might not be simple what to do about it, but we know that there's sort of like a fight or flight thing. But basically any other emotion than that is a lot more complicated, in some cases insidious and like just like treacherous territory, how to navigate. And, it's like, okay, they're feeling this, but a lot of times when other people are having strong or complex emotions, one, it provokes a reaction. So now we're having, our reactive emotions to their emotions, but then we're thinking about basically what emotions we want to convey, or even more complicated, emotions that were our immediate reaction. They're reading our face, oftentimes correctly, and now we have to deal with they're having a strong emotion. I had a reaction to that emotion. Now they're reacting to my emotion, emotional reaction to their emotion. And that can be used really powerfully to maybe not necessarily control or manipulate. I don't think there's that much like in the moment happening, but even when there isn't intention behind it, finding yourself in that situation is just super, super difficult. So I was just kind of exploring that. I've been exploring that for a very long time. And I would, again, fall back on the baseline. When somebody's angry, we know what the at least socially acceptable response is, like, oh, stop being angry, calm down, chill out. Now, those don't really work very effectively if you're trying to de-escalate a conflict, but for the most part in, modern day, we feel like that's a defensible option. We can call out that they are bad and they should de-escalate because of anger. And I think that's generally fair. I think it's more complicated than that, if you're focused on outcomes rather than justifiable intentions, then telling somebody who's upset or angry to calm down is not super effective. So, maybe, you know, giving it some time, taking a deep breath and be like, oh, let me think, may be more productive. But in general, we still understand how to deal with anger to some extent. If it can be resolved peacefully. If it can't, then, run or self-defense, I suppose. But I'm not going to talk about that primarily today. I think all the other emotions need a lot more attention. Like when someone's sad, I think in the modern day, whether you call it first world problems or just, like a heavily, digital, meta existence, I'm not trying to demonize screens. I think screens are great and fun, but it does create this, extra meta level of giving us way more information than we've ever had about other people through different communication forms or just exposure to lots of people talking about social ideals or cultural ideas, but also, weirdly less information. So like, you might be in a situation where it's only voice or only text message, and your brain, needs to construct all these additional, whatever their facial expression, all those sorts of information sources that you don't have. So when it comes to someone being like sad, a lot of times the emotional reaction, that kind of comes is, support or, trying to, how do I make them not sad? It's not, especially if you're having a good day, but also if you're having a bad day, if someone's sad, like that's a bummer, it's, in some areas of the internet or like on Discord servers, I would, sometimes poke and tease because when you're dealing with internet people, you sort of have a different set of cultural expectations. They might be better or worse, but in general, if you're dealing with internet people, there's infinite amounts of sadness and very finite amount of, just, positive energy out there. So it can be very easy to be like, oh, you're sad, that's, you want to talk about it. But if you indulge that sort of atmosphere on the internet, even in person, it can be, you can be stuck on that topic. There's infinite numbers of things to complain about, and human beings are great at finding complaints within complaints. I'm certainly good at it, and it is a temptation that I find myself having to resist on a daily basis. There's always things to complain about, and sometimes that can be productive, but overall, you should err on the side of looking for gratitude and positivity, because it'll be a better life. The ends justify the means. Focus on the positive. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. I mean, whatever. But when it comes to other people being sad or complaining, that is a very complicated meta emotional experience, because on one hand, if you are too dismissive and not like supportive to someone being kind of sad, like complaining about like maybe their dog died or something like that, that's very sad. How could you not be super sympathetic to that? And I'm not arguing to not be sympathetic when something really terrible or tragic happens, but you can be stuck there. You could be stuck there for a few minutes or a few hours, and there is, I think, especially on internet, but also I think in person, it's leaching over this kind of gut reaction or maybe culturally influenced meta reaction where it's like, okay, they're sad, I need to be sad so that they don't attack me for like, not being supportive enough or not being sad enough, or, I shouldn't try to cheer them up, can be also met with hostility and not being sensitive enough. And I would just say that's super complicated. I think that's sort of like, you could say like the safe option to just kind of, match, pace yourself to wherever they're feeling. But in general, that's going to trend everyone to a, very negative vibe. And I see that in a lot of social situations and otherwise. So it's something to think about, not necessarily like, oh, just try to be more positive. I don't think you'll actually get necessarily great results and reactions from other people. And in some ways, this is what I explored with contradiction theories, which is, well, maybe you can secretly hold on to a more positive spirit without saying anything that may be reacted to in a hostile manner. But I guess what I'm really trying to poke at is just that it's a very difficult modern problem of nuanced sadness, and it's not necessarily as extreme as like a pet dying. Sometimes it's just like, oh, something shitty happened at work, or I can't find work, or someone rejected me, or I can't find anyone, or I went on a date and like it sort of went well, but they were also kind of mean. Very nuanced sadness that is complicated for other people to interact with or complicated to be on the receiving end, and then you're having emotions about that. Yeah, I guess I just feel like there's not enough thought put onto how difficult it is, and maybe it's always been this way, but as we evolve to heightened levels of nuance, or really just very smaller and smaller levels of detail of like social calibration, I guess, like I should be supportive of the sad thing that happened, but I'm also having all this all these ideas about advice that I would give the person, but I'm not supposed to give advice because unless the person's asking for it, it won't be productive. So we can get caught in this extremely disassociated state from like what we truly feel. And that's something that I've been exploring in the game too, with chemistry as being a measurement of how far you are from your authentic emotion. Like, that's great that we live in a way more emotionally aware civilization, but I think there's a very real hidden cost. The farther you get from how you truly feel internally is just going to make you extremely tired, because you're building all these structures within structures. Like, the one of your honest emotions that you might not want to face, and maybe some people give me a hard time, let me know in the comments what you think about this, if if you disagree, and maybe the pet example is not a good one, since my family's never really had a pet long term. But if someone comes to you and they're sad about like a dog dying, one of your genuine emotions might be like, oh man, this is going to ruin my entire day. Or maybe you had some exciting news that you feels like is not is too socially autistic, to be shared after that. But that's sad. Again, that's erring on the side of pacing to someone's more negative emotions. Maybe part of it's just like, oh, I just want to support them, they're a good friend. But part of it might be like, oh, I'm worried that they might lash out on me and make me feel bad for sharing a positive thing, so I'm just gonna not. And I think there's a lot of those tiny lean negative, or just avoid positive genuine emotions because they're not safe. If you share something you're excited about, like something you're working on, and somebody is down on you, it might be completely unrelated. Maybe it's related to your work, whatever. Maybe they just genuinely don't like it, or think it's dumb. Okay, but like, that's a danger. So you might avoid it more and more and more until you just don't like want to do anything at all. And I think that is connected to I don't know, a general kind of creative disassociation. Like, why am I making anything? Like, it doesn't make me happy. And there are many reasons to create stuff, not just creatively, but like to do work, to be productive, get chores done. Ultimately, you do want that to be positively reinforcing. When you do something, you want it to feel good in some ways. And I do think we suffer from a meta emotionality problem where we're doing so much mind reading, and I'm definitely guilty of this, or somebody comes to you with a sad vibe or energy or detail about their current life, or just something random that happened, and it's way safer to be like, oh, I'm sorry, how can I help? Instead of being like, I don't even know how to deal with that situation otherwise, being like, all right, pick yourself up, let's keep it moving. Like, maybe that's not your place to go. But especially in an internet age where there, I think there's infinite levels, infinite amounts of sadness and sad stuff going on. It becomes increasingly like impossible to be positive without being attacked. And that doesn't make you the good guy to try to be positive anyways. I'm just saying it's difficult. And yeah, so give yourself some respect. If you are feeling demotivated, as I often do when I kind of slide in the temptation of hedging. Some of my dad used to say, he called it negative thinking, which is exactly captures this concept, which is that it's safer to just be pessimistic, say things will go poorly, because that's socially safe. You can always bet down. You can always the world's ending, and people might be like, oh, whatever, you're crazy. But if it does end, then you can be like, I told you so. And if it doesn't end, you're like, well, I'm glad I was wrong. All true, but what's your emotional experience? Your emotional experience is suffering and negative, and and maybe people telling you you're crazy. But maybe you can carry out some actions that align with whatever you believe is going to happen. But on an emotional experience level, I think we should try to lean more positive. We've been airing negative for a long time, maybe forever. Maybe that's built into us, psychologically. But I think most people would benefit, if not all of us, from being a little bit, or a lot more optimistic and positive. Is it so bad to dream a big dream and be like, I'm excited, I can do this? No, how are you going to do anything if you don't believe that there's even a chance of a good outcome? So I don't know. Lean positive and respect the difficulty, of a meta emotions. Maybe when people bring you sad, you can be like, oh, sorry, but internally be like, I'm getting out of this conversation. I'm jumping out, so I can hold on to whatever positive life force that I woke up with. All right, have a good one.